The new F1 regulations in 2022 have made Formula 1 more exciting. Following other cars is much easier, and as a result, there tends to be more excitement on track. There have even been calls to consider dropping DRS at this early stage of the season. But there's something else that these new cars have shown, and that is how quickly these top-tier drivers have been able to adapt to these new cars. So are the 2022 cars exposing the best drivers on the F1 grid? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. There are some drivers this season that have proven their car's abilities more than their teammates. Particularly with the midfield order changing at each race, there are some drivers that have consistently been ahead of the one other driver on the grid with equal machinery. These drivers have proven their ability to adapt, which is crucial for a Formula 1 driver to reach their peak in this sport. What's clear from these disparities though is that a car in 2022 could be perceived as terrible or brilliant based on that single driver's performance. And in a year where all teams have scored points after just 4 races, there are certainly opportunities to prove a car's worth when the midfield is just so competitive. The cars that look good because of a single driver. I'm going to start by looking at 3 teams that only look strong in the midfield because of the performances of a single driver in Formula 1, and it's difficult not to start with Alfa Romeo and Valtteri Bottas. The Finnish driver has scored 30 points so far, and this could have easily been more if it wasn't for his retirement in Saudi Arabia, where he was competing with Esteban Ocon on track, as the Alpine driver ended up finishing 6th. Since moving to Alfa Romeo, Bottas has become the new king of the midfield, as he's been consistently picking up strong point scoring positions, finishing well ahead of his teammate and only behind the top teams. What I find fascinating about Bottas' performances in 2022 is that he's been able to be just so consistent. So often this year the teams have had stronger and weaker circuits. You just have to look at the McLarens to see how many ups and downs some teams have been having. But Bottas has been the single constant in the midfield across the season so far, with a 5th place finish at Imola being his strongest result. But without Bottas' performances, the Alfa Romeo wouldn't look like a car that's capable of getting into the top of the midfield. Zhou Guanyu had a great start to his 2022 campaign with a single point on his debut in Bahrain. But since then he's struggled to match Bottas in the same car, as he's failed to achieve points at any of the other races this year. I don't believe it's fair to criticise Zhou too harshly based on these performances, as this is his rookie season and he will learn throughout the year. Plus, being up against Bottas is never going to be easy. The Finnish driver has just joined the team after 5 seasons with Mercedes, competing at the front of the order. Up against Lewis Hamilton, he was forced to bring his level up to match the standards set by his teammate, and whilst he was unable to beat Hamilton at Mercedes, he was clearly performing at an incredibly high level, enabling the team to win the Constructors' Championship for 5 years on the bounce. As a result, Zhou has a great teammate to learn from, and I believe he will improve throughout this year, and we've seen this mentorship already as I mentioned in my video about Bottas a few weeks ago. He's done well to keep his racing clean, and as a result, Alfa Romeo will have the confidence to invest more in the development of the car rather than being forced to produce replacement parts. So because of Bottas, Alfa Romeo is sat 5th in the Constructors' standings, scoring more points this season already than they've achieved over the last couple of years combined, and it's looking like it could be this team's best season since 2012, when Kamui Kobayashi partnered Sergio Perez, achieving 126 points and got 6th in the Constructors' standings. It's a new-look team that has come together right at the change of the regulations, and as a result, I can see them being successful for a few years to come, with Bottas becoming a mentor potentially for Théo Pourchaire, the young Sauber driver poised to join the F1 grid. The next team that I want to discuss is Haas, and for me, this is again a team that are perceived as having an excellent year so far, but it could be so different for the team had they not replaced Mazepin with Magnussen. Similar to the Alfa Romeo partnership, of the 15 points Haas have scored so far, all of them have come from Kevin Magnussen. The Haas car does appear to be more variable in its performance though, with some circuits suiting it more than others. But when the car is in the right place, it's Magnussen that's delivering the results, with 5th place in Bahrain being the obvious highlight. In these lower end cars, it's crucial that the drivers find the consistency to be there and capitalise on any opportunity that presents itself from a chaotic Grand Prix. And Magnussen benefited in Bahrain with the retirements from the Red Bulls and at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix with incidents ahead of him towards the start of the race. It's his consistency that's enabled more points to be scored. This is something that Schumacher has struggled with. Similar to Zhou, Schumacher is still in the learning phase of his career. He's presumably benefiting from having a more experienced teammate this year and is going to improve a lot through the season. But so far, he's struggled to deliver on expectations. His performance in Miami was arguably his most disappointing yet, as he was running in the points right towards the end of the race before making contact with Vettel in what was deemed to be a racing incident. It's easy to say that Schumacher should have just kept his nose clean and made it to the end, but it went from an opportunity to have a huge boost in confidence to a disappointing mistake that's going to be damaging his confidence even more. And to add to this, from a development perspective, Magnussen has tended to keep his racing clean, limiting the damage done despite only recently returning to the sport. While some of Schumacher's crashes have been particularly costly, meaning the team will have been able to focus less on their new parts to keep them competitive. This is a crucial factor with Haas in my opinion. They're at risk of losing out and dropping back when it comes to their competitors because they have less budget and resource to keep up their development, and these crashes won't have helped them more generally. But it's Kevin Magnussen that's done an excellent job of showing what his car is capable of, and for want of a better phrase, outperforming his machinery. The third team I want to highlight with a huge teammate disparity is Williams. Alex Albon looks at home in the Williams team already, despite joining the team so recently, and following a situation where he'd been dropped by the Red Bull team. But he's grabbed his opportunity with both hands and has proven his capability in the car that is widely regarded as the worst on the F1 grid right now. Albon's performances in Australia, Italy and Miami were excellent. They were a perfect example of the point I mentioned earlier with Kevin Magnussen. Albon kept his nose clean and made sure he was in it at the end, and whenever there's been opportunities, he's taken them. Without Verstappen's retirement in Australia, Albon wouldn't have scored his point, and then in Miami he benefited from the retirements ahead and his ability to manage the hard compound tyre. These performances aren't luck. They come from Albon giving the Williams team the opportunity to try something different, going for all but one lap on the hard tyre in Australia for example. It's these kind of actions that are so crucial for a team that is right now on the back foot, as Williams is at the moment. Latifi, on the other hand, is struggling. He's making errors that have resulted in crashes, and he's failed to get the car up the order and be in the right place at the right time. Of course, this could change and he could still improve, but as with Schumacher, his confidence is low right now, and this is costly for the Williams team, as they're unable to invest fully in the development of that car to drag them back up the order. So Bottas, Magnussen and Albon are excellent examples of drivers that have delivered brilliant results compared to their teammates, and these 2022 cars have enabled them to prove their true capability on track. They are by no means the only drivers achieving this right now, but for me, they are the ones clearly showing their worth. Meanwhile, their teammates tend to be at risk, as they are struggling to adapt to the new 2022 cars. So what about the other situations, where there are two drivers achieving strong results? Well, before we look at these teams, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. I'm aiming for 50,000 subscribers by the summer break, so if you're enjoying the videos and haven't yet done so, please consider subscribing. Thanks. The drivers in excellent form. On a similar theme to drivers achieving more from their cars than their teammates, there are teammates that are closer together on track than they have been in previous seasons. A brilliant example of this is Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly. After 5 races so far, they are split by just 1 pace in the standings and by 4 points, with the Japanese driver leading the way for the AlphaTauri team. This is something that is so far from the situation that we saw from them last season, where Gasly was comfortably ahead of Tsunoda, finishing ahead of him at 17 of the 21 races last season. This year, it's been much closer between the two, albeit with both suffering from reliability issues that have surely cost them points. So on the face of it, it seems like Tsunoda has taken a step forward. Perhaps he's enjoying these new regulations more than his teammates so far this season, or alternatively, perhaps Gasly is struggling with the way that these new cars are designed. It's difficult to tell this early into the season, as many would expect Gasly to end up on top in this pairing, and there is still a long way to go for them this year. Unlike the pairings I mentioned in the last section of this video, the comparisons need more time to become clear when the teammates are close. Similarly, the pairing have scored their points at different races, so it seems like either the drivers have significant track preferences or they're struggling to understand this AlphaTauri car and how to get it to perform at its best. What's fascinating about the AlphaTauri teammate battle is that the two drivers both have something to prove this season. Gasly's in the last year of his contract with the team and is hotly tipped to be moving elsewhere, although where that could be remains unclear. Meanwhile, Tsunoda himself claimed that he was fortunate to be kept on by the team for this year, and so with Albon performing well and still being part of the Red Bull setup, there could have been doubts about Tsunoda's future. So if they end up more closely matched this season, they could both end up with positive outcomes and stay with the team. The other team I want to highlight in this section is Red Bull. Max Verstappen has become the most consistent driver on the grid over the last couple of seasons, and he's finished first in all races that he's completed this year. So beating him is always going to be a challenge, but Perez has been so much closer than he was last season, particularly when looking at the early part of the year. In Saudi Arabia, Perez beat Verstappen in qualifying and should have finished ahead of him in the race if it wasn't for the safety car. And in Australia and Italy, he finished second, picking up the pieces after Verstappen retired at Albert Park and keeping Leclerc behind at Imola to protect the 1-2 finish for Red Bull. So Perez is still behind Verstappen, but he's much closer this year. He's managed to get more comfortable with this car than last year's, and as a result, he's right up there supporting the team in the Constructors' Championship and will surely be on hand to support Verstappen when competing with Leclerc in the drivers' standings. As I mentioned in the AlphaTauri section, there's a long way to go in this season, and it could surely change with time as these cars develop. But from the early stage in the year, I've been impressed with Perez's ability to keep up with Verstappen when compared to last season, so I think both drivers are in excellent form. The honourable mentions. I could have spoken about all the driver pairings on the grid in this video and where I see them, but I think many pairings sit in the middle of these two sections. Some of the drivers doing well compared to their teammates include the likes of Norris, Russell and Ocon, who are well ahead of their teammates in terms of points scored so far this year, and could have easily been added into the section where they're proving the true capabilities of their team's cars. I also think that Vettel and Stroll both seem to be starting to find their feet in an Aston Martin car that is slowly finding its way back up the order. I also want to talk about Leclerc versus Sainz in the Ferrari. This could be a video topic in itself. That pair was so close on track last season, but mistakes have crept in for the Spanish driver. It's a change that's seen Sainz fall well behind in the drivers' standings, and two early exits from Australia and Italy have not helped that. But regardless of those results, he's still been a bit behind Leclerc this season, and as such, I think his title hopes have surely gone by the wayside. Now it's time to prove himself once again, much like the other drivers that I discussed earlier. So I think 2022 has not only seen a small shake-up of the order in terms of the car's abilities, but also a real exposure of how good these cars have been for some drivers. I think for the majority of these, it's a matter of confidence. When a driver's comfortable in their car and with their team, they tend to perform better. And with brand new cars to learn, there are certainly some drivers that have shown their ability to adapt faster and get comfortable in their cars quicker than others. Of course, we'll never know what a driver like Verstappen could achieve in the Williams this year, which is a shame, as it's very difficult to know just how good some of these cars or drivers really are. But I think that what we've seen with Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams is just how important having a strong driver lineup is to achieve great results in Formula 1. If you want to learn more about the Williams pairing and how Latifi is at risk of losing his F1 seat, then make sure you watch this video next.